You think rock bottom is being 7 months pregnant and watching your suitcase hit the pavement. My mother-in-law sneered, "Get out," while my husband stood silent. I thought I was alone until the deep rumble of engines approached. They thought they were kicking out a helpless girl. They did not realize the men in those cars were about to buy their debt and remind them exactly who I really am. My name is Esther Claiborne, and the first thing I noticed when my life fell apart was how loud a plastic wheel sounds when it scrapes against limestone. My suitcase, a heavy gray thing packed with a haste that betrayed panic, tumbled down the final 3 steps of the front porch. It landed sideways on the paved walkway with a dull final thud. The sound echoed through the manicured silence of Briar Ridge like a gunshot. I stood at the top of the stairs, one hand instinctively clutching the swell of my stomach. 7 months. My baby kicked against my palm, a frantic flutter that mirrored the rhythm of my own heart. The late afternoon sun over Virginia usually cast a golden, welcoming glow upon these houses, but today it fell like a spotlight on a stage where I was the unwilling lead in a tragedy, and do not think about coming back for the rest of it. Celeste Whittaker said. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the grand oak entrance I had polished just 2 days ago. She wore a cream cashmere cardigan that cost more than my first car, and her face was composed into a mask of righteous indignation. She was not shouting. Celeste never shouted. She projected. She spoke with the practiced diction of a woman who knew the neighbors were listening. "Brant," I whispered. My voice cracked. It was humiliating how small I sounded. I looked past her shoulder to the man standing in the foyer shadows. Brant Whittaker, my husband, the man who had promised to build a sanctuary for us. He looked at the floor, studying the grain of the hardwood as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He could not even look me in the eye while his mother threw his pregnant wife onto the street. "Go on, look at him," Celeste taunted, stepping forward to block my view. "He is done with you, Esther. We are all done with the charade. Did you really think you could trap a Whittaker with a pregnancy? We are not even sure that thing you are carrying has a drop of our blood." The accusation hit me harder than the suitcase had hit the ground. It was a lie so bold, so calculated, that it took the air right out of my lungs. "You know that is not true," I managed to say, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and shock. "I know that you are a grifter," Celeste announced, raising her voice so it carried across the lawn to where the neighbors had started to gather. "A gold digger who thought she could climb the social ladder on her back. Well, the climb is over. You are trespassing." I looked out at the cul-de-sac. The suburban silence had been broken. The Marshalls across the street were watering their garden, though Mrs. Marshall was holding her phone up. The black lens pointed directly at me. 2 joggers had stopped at the corner, whispering. I could feel the red recording light blinking in my mind. They were not seeing a human being in crisis. They were seeing content. They were seeing the scandalous end of the girl from nowhere who dared to marry the Prince of Marrow Bay. I turned back to the house, desperate for one shred of humanity. And that was when I saw her up on the 2nd floor, the master bedroom window. Sloane Merritt. She was standing there right where I used to stand to watch Grant leave for work. She was wearing a silk robe, my silk robe, the one I received at my bridal shower. She did not hide. She leaned against the glass, arms crossed, and she smiled. It was a small, tight smile of absolute victory. She looked down at me, shivering on the porch in my maternity dress. And then she slowly reached up and closed the curtains. The message was clear. "I house now." I stumbled down the steps, reaching for the handle of my suitcase. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I needed to get out of here. I needed a taxi. I reached into my purse for my phone. Dead silence on the line. I looked at the screen. No service. My stomach dropped. I tapped the banking app, hoping to transfer funds to call and Yuba using the Wi-Fi that hadn't disconnected yet. Account locked. Contact administrator. They had not just kicked me out. They had erased me. Celeste had timed this perfectly. She knew exactly how to sever the lifelines. I was 7 months pregnant, standing on a sidewalk in a gated community where walking was considered suspicious activity with no money, no phone service, and no way to leave. "You might want to start walking, dear," Celeste called out from the porch, leaning against the door frame. I have already called security. They will be here in 10 minutes to remove the trash. I felt the tears pricking my eyes, hot and stinging. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I would not cry. Not in front of her. Not in front of the camera phones. Here now, take this. The voice was raw, quiet. I turned to see Mr. Graham Dorsey standing by the hedge that separated our lawn from his. He was an older man, a retired judge who usually kept to himself. He held out a bottle of water and an old battered smartphone. I saw what they did, he muttered, his eyes darting towards Celeste with disgust. Take it. Make your call, child. I took the water with shaking hands. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Be quick, he whispered. She is watching. I held the phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad. There was only one number I knew by heart, a number I had sworn I would never use. I had spent the last 3 years trying to prove I was Esther Claiborne, the independent woman, not just the little sister of 2 titans. I wanted to be loved for me, not for the empire behind my name. I looked at the closed curtains of the master bedroom. I looked at Grant's cowardice. I looked at Celeste's smug face. I dialed. It rang once. Speak. A deep baritone voice answered. No greeting, just efficiency. Mason, I said. My voice was barely a whisper. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavy and charged. Esther, they threw me out, I said, the dam finally breaking in my chest, though I kept my face dry. Grant, Celeste, they threw me out on the street. They locked the accounts. I am on the sidewalk. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then a rustling sound like a chair being pushed back violently against a hardwood floor. Are you hurt? No, I said, just humiliated. Where are you exactly? The front curb, Briar Ridge. Stay there, Mason said. The command was absolute. It was not a request. Do not move 1 inch. Do not speak to them. Do not sign anything. We're 2 minutes out. 2 minutes. I asked, confused. How? We have been watching Esther. We were just waiting for you to ask. The line went dead. I handed the phone back to Mr. Graham. Thank you. Celeste laughed. She had walked down the steps to the edge of the walkway, wanting to be closer to the finale. What did you call? Esther. Some charity hotline. Or maybe one of those low-life friends from your old life coming to pick you up in a rusted sedan. Oh, this is going to be rich. She turned to Mrs. Marshall across the street, pitching her voice for the recording. It is just so sad when they refuse to accept reality, isn't it? We tried to help her, but some people just cannot be civilized. I stood up straighter. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling the life inside me, the only innocent thing in this entire zip code. I looked at Celeste, really looked at her, and realized how small she was. She thought she held the power because her name was on the deed and mine was on the street. She thought power was humiliation. I took a deep breath of the crisp Virginia air. If I fall now, I told myself, I stay down forever. You should have checked the background. Celeste, I said softly. What was that? She snapped. I said I raised my head. You really should have done a better background check. Celeste scoffed, opening her mouth to deliver another insult. But the words died in her throat. It started as a vibration in the soles of my feet, a low rhythmic thming that was felt before it was heard. It was not the high-pitched whine of the suburban SUVs that populated Briar Ridge. This was a guttural mechanical growl. It sounded like a storm front moving in at ground level. The neighbors lowered their phones, turning their heads toward the entrance of the cul-de-sac. The birds seemed to stop singing. Celeste frowned, looking down the road. What on earth is that noise from around the corner? Black chrome caught the afternoon sun. It was not a rusted sedan. It was a convoy, and the sound of those engines made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, not in fear, but in a sudden, fierce recognition. My brothers had arrived. To understand the violence of the crash, you have to understand the height from which I fell. 3 years ago, I was not the woman clutching a stomach on a sidewalk. I was the woman in the shadows, wearing the standard issue black slacks and black polo shirt of Harbor Vane Strategies. I was an event coordinator, which is a polite corporate title for a professional servant. My job was to make sure the champagne flutes were never empty and that the rich donors of Virginia never had to look at a dirty napkin for longer than 3 seconds. I was invisible by design. I was good at it. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be invisible, trying to outrun the shadow of the Claiborne name, trying to prove I could build a life without a trust fund as a safety net. Then Grant Whittaker walked into the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. He did not look like the other men in the room. He did not look past me. I was adjusting a floral arrangement that had started to wilt under the heat of the stage lights when a hand gently touched my shoulder. I flinched, turning around, expecting a reprimand from my supervisor. Instead, I found Grant holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You look like you are the only person in this room actually working," he said. His smile was easy, practiced, and devastatingly warm. "Take a break. Nobody is watching." That was the first lie he ever told me. People were always watching. In his world, observation was a blood sport. But I fell for it. I fell for the way he made me feel like an exception to the rules of his class. We dated in a whirlwind that felt less like a romance and more like an extraction mission. He pulled me out of my small apartment and my invisible job and placed me into the passenger seat of his convertible. He told me he loved that I was a blank slate, a woman with no pretenses. He said he was tired of the social climbers and the debutantes who had been auditioning for the role of his wife since kindergarten. He wanted something real. I thought I was the reality check he needed. I did not realize I was just a rebellion he would eventually outgrow. The transition into Briar Ridge was not a welcome. It was an inspection. I remember the first time I met Celeste Whittaker. It was a lunch at the country club, a venue where the air conditioning was set to a temperature that required cashmere. I was wearing a dress I had bought off the rack at a department store, thinking it looked elegant. Celeste did not look at my face. She looked at my shoes. Then she looked at the stitching on my hem. "Esther," she said, testing the name like it was a wine that had turned to vinegar. "Just Esther. No middle name, no family seat in the Hamptons or the Caroliners, just Esther," I replied, trying to hold my head high. "My parents are private people." It was the truth in a way. The Claibornes were private because they were powerful enough to buy silence. But Celeste took it as an admission of poverty. She turned to Grant right there at the table and said the words that should have made me run. "Grant, darling," she said, slicing into her salad with surgical precision, "we do not marry people we have to explain. It is exhausted having to draft a backstory for nobody." Grant had laughed it off. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Mother is just protective," he told me later. "She worries about the family image. Once we are married, she will see you are one of us." I believed him because I wanted to believe that love was stronger than genealogy. The wedding was at Whittaker Hall, a lavish affair that cost more than most people earned in a decade. I walked down the aisle toward him, feeling like I had finally found a place to rest. But before the ceremony, there had been the meeting in the library, a long mahogany table, Grant's family lawyer, and a document thick enough to stop a bullet. "It is standard," Grant had said, sliding the pen toward me. "Just a prenuptial agreement to protect the family estate. It means nothing, Esther. It is just paper. If you trust me, you will sign it." I signed it. I did not read the clauses about termination of residence. I did not read the stipulations about reputation management. I signed it because I thought we were building a partnership, not negotiating a hostage situation. For 2 years. I tried. I really tried. I became the perfect wife. I learned to organize charity galas instead of working them. I learned which fork to use for the fish and which for the salad. I learned to smile when the neighbors at Briar Ridge asked me pointed questions about where I went to college or why they had never seen my family at the summer solstice parties. "I am estranged from my brothers," I would say vaguely. It was the only lie I told, but I told it to protect the one thing that was mine, my identity separate from the Claiborne billions. Celeste, however, never stopped digging. She was like a hound catching a scent. Every Sunday dinner, between the roast and the dessert, the interrogation would resume. "It is just so strange," she would muse, swirling her red wine. "You have the manners of a well-bred girl, Esther, but the history of a ghost. Are you running from the law? Or is your family just so dreadfully embarrassing that you erase them?" Mother, stop, Grant would say, but his defense was getting weaker. He was starting to look at me with the same curiosity, as if he wondered if he had bought a counterfeit painting. Then came the positive test. I remember the evening perfectly. The rain was hammering against the French windows of the living room. I handed Grant the small plastic stick. For a moment, the old Grant came back. He lifted me off the ground, spinning me around, burying his face in my neck. "A baby," he whispered. "We are having a baby." I felt safe. I felt that finally I had given the Whittaker something that could not be disputed. An heir, a blood connection that would cement my place in this cold, beautiful house. We went to the main house to tell Celeste. Grant was beaming. He announced the news with pride. "Mother, you are going to be a grandmother." Celeste sat in her wing-back chair by the fire. She did not stand up. She did not smile. She looked at Grant, and then her eyes slid over to me. Her gaze dropped to my stomach, which was still flat, and then back up to my face. It was not a look of joy. It was a look of calculation. It was the look of a general assessing a tactical error on a battlefield. "Are we sure?" she asked softly. "Of course we are sure." Grant laughed, missing the venom in her tone. "The doctor confirmed it today." "No," Celeste said, her voice dropping an octave, turning the air in the room to ice. "I mean, are we sure it is a Whittaker? Esther has been spending a lot of time volunteering at the shelter lately. One hears stories." Grant went stiff beside me. "Mother, that is insane." "Is it?" Celeste took a sip of her tea. "She comes from nowhere, Grant. People from nowhere do desperate things to secure their position. A baby is a very convenient insurance policy." Grant looked at her shocked, but he did not scream. He did not demand an apology. And in that silence I saw the first crack in the foundation. I saw him wonder just for a second. But a second is all it takes for a marriage to die. I placed a hand over my stomach, instinctively protecting the life that was the size of a blueberry. I thought the baby would be my anchor. I did not realize it would be the catalyst for my eviction. Celeste was not looking at a grandchild. She was looking at a liability she needed to liquidate before the birth certificate was signed. By the 5th month of my pregnancy, the silence in our house had changed texture. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of two people reading in the same room. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of secrets being kept behind locked screens. Grant started coming home after 9:00, smelling of expensive scotch and a perfume that was decidedly floral, not the crisp, clean scent of the office air freshener he claimed lingered on his suits. He told me he was working on a massive acquisition for the firm, a deal that required all hands on deck. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, because the alternative was admitting that the fairy tale I had bought into was dissolving while my body was expanding. Then came the second phone. I found it charging behind a stack of books in his home office. It was a sleek black device identical to his personal one, but when I tapped the screen, it demanded a 6-digit passcode I did not know. When I confronted him, Grant did not even look up from his laptop. "It is a burner for the deal, Esther," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "We are dealing with sensitive, intellectual property. The client requires encrypted lines. Honestly, must you interrogate me about every piece of hardware in this house?" "You never mentioned it," I said, my hand resting on the swell of my belly. "You used to tell me everything." He finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing with a mix of pity and annoyance. "You are hormonal, Esther. Dr. Evans said this would happen. You are fixating on things because you are anxious about the birth. You are inventing ghosts." That was his favorite weapon, my own biology. Every suspicion I voiced was dismissed as hysteria. Every question was labeled as a symptom of my condition. He made me feel crazy so he would not have to feel guilty. And then Sloane Merritt walked through our front door. Celeste introduced her at a Sunday dinner as if she were unveiling a piece of art. "Esther, this is Sloane. She and Grant were inseparable at Yale. She has just moved back to Marrow Bay to join the firm as a senior consultant." Sloane was beautiful in a way that felt predatory. She had sharp features, glossy, dark hair, and a way of moving that suggested she owned the space she occupied. She did not shake my hand. She offered a limp wrist and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "It is so good to finally meet the woman who settled Grant down," She said the emphasis on the word settled made it sound like a compromise. Over the next few weeks, Sloane became a fixture. She was not just a colleague. She was an invasive species. I would come downstairs in the morning to find her already in my kitchen, leaning against the marble island, drinking coffee from my favorite mug. "Oh, sorry," she said one morning, not moving an inch. "Celeste let me in. We needed to go over some briefs before the car arrives. I hope you do not mind." She called my mother-in-law Mom. She did it casually, slipping it into sentences like a knife slipping between ribs. "Mom said the roast was dry last time." Or Mom thinks blue is really Grant's color. She sat in the chair next to Grant at the dining table, the spot where I used to sit before Celeste rearranged the seating chart to accommodate the flow of conversation. I tried to talk to Grant about it. "She is always here." "Grant, it feels disrespectful. She is family, essentially." Grant replied, tightening his tie in the mirror. "You are being territorial. Esther, it is unbecoming. Sloane is helping me save the company. You should be grateful." But gratitude was hard to find when I found the velvet box. It was tucked into the glove compartment of Grant's Mercedes, hidden beneath the owner's manual. I opened it to find a delicate gold bracelet with a charm shaped like a star. On the back, in microscopic engraving, was the letter S. My heart hammered against my ribs. I waited for him in the driveway that night. "Who is S?" I asked, holding up the box. Grant did not flinch. He laughed. It was a smooth practice sound. "That is for Sheila. Sheila Vance, the head of the acquisition target. It is a closing gift. Esther, S for Sheila. We are trying to butter her up. It looks very personal for a client." I said, "That is how business is done at this level." He said, snatching the box from my hand, "God, Esther, stop snooping. You are becoming impossible to live with." He almost made me believe him. Almost 2 days later, at the Whittaker Foundation charity gala, I saw it. I was wearing a maternity gown that made me feel like a tent, standing by the buffet table with a glass of sparkling water. Sloane swept into the room wearing a backless red dress that clung to her like a second skin. She was laughing at something Grant whispered in her ear. As she raised her hand to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, an intimate gesture that froze the blood in my veins, the light caught her wrist, the gold star, the charm. She saw me looking. She did not pull her hand away. Instead, she turned her wrist slowly, letting the diamonds catch the chandelier light, and looked me dead in the eye. She smiled. It was a smile that said, "I know you know, and I know you can do absolutely nothing about it." That was the moment the tears stopped and the cold logic set in. I realized I was not crazy. I was being hunted. I stopped asking questions. I started taking notes. I bought a small leather-bound notebook and hid it inside my knitting bag. I recorded everything. November 12th, Grant left at 7. Sloane's car, a white Porsche, license plate VLX 492, arrived at the Whittaker estate at 7:15. November 14th, Celeste dismissed the cleaning staff early. Grant and Sloane spent 2 hours in the library with the doors locked. I began to notice the coordination. Celeste would send me on errands. "Esther, dear, pick up the floral arrangements in the city," that kept me out of the house for exactly the duration of Sloane's visits. There were moving pieces around me, treating me like an obstacle on a game board. Then came the conversation that chilled me more than the affair itself. I was resting in the solarium, hidden by a large potted fern, reading a book on infant care. The glass doors to the patio were open. I heard footsteps, the click of heels and the heavy tread of wingtips. "You have to be patient, Sloane." Celeste's voice drifted in. "The timing must be legally watertight." "I am tired of waiting," Celeste Sloane complained. Her voice was petulant, sharp. "He is still sleeping in the same bed as her." "Not for long," Celeste soothed. "The lawyers are finalizing the restructuring of the trust. If everything goes to plan, the financial restructuring will be finished before the baby is born. Once the assets are moved, she can have the divorce." "She will get nothing." "And the baby?" Sloane asked. "We will deal with custody when the time comes," Celeste said dismissively. "Grant does not need that burden right now. We need the Claiborne connection severed before she realizes what she is entitled to." My breath hitched. They were not just planning to leave me. They were planning to strip me of everything and potentially take my child. I stayed frozen until they walked away. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my book. They thought I was a poor nobody. They thought I was helpless. They had no idea that the Claiborne connection they wanted to sever was not a marriage license, but a bloodline they'd failed to investigate properly. That night, a storm rolled in off the coast. The lights flickered and died around 8:00, plunging the house into darkness. Grant was not home. He was working late. I lit a flashlight, my heart pounding a rhythm of rebellion against my ribs. I knew Celeste was at her bridge club. The house was empty. I went straight to Celeste's study. I had never dared to enter this room without permission. It smelled of old paper and expensive potpourri. I moved the beam of my flashlight across the mahogany desk. Nothing. I opened the top drawer, stationery. I tried the bottom drawer, locked. I remembered seeing Celeste hide a key in a porcelain vase on the mantelpiece years ago. I reached in, my fingers brushed cold metal. I unlocked the drawer. Inside there were neat rows of hanging files. I flipped through them with trembling fingers. Tax, real estate, investments, and then I stopped. A thick red folder sat at the very back. The label was typed in bold. Black letters, Claiborne, verification. I pulled it out. It was heavy. I opened it, shining the light on the first page. It was a private investigator's report. There were grainy photos of me from college, copies of my birth certificate, but someone had circled my last name in red marker and written a note in the margin. No trace of parents in public records, siblings unknown, trust fund existence. Subject is isolated, but underneath that there was a newer document dated just 2 days ago. It was an email print out from a contact in New York. Recla lineage. We found a discrepancy. There are 2 Claiborne brothers who run a private equity firm in Manhattan. They share a mother with your subject. We need to confirm if there is a relationship before you execute the eviction. My blood ran cold. They were getting close. They knew about Mason and Reed. They just did not know if the brothers cared about me. I heard the front door open downstairs. Grant, be careful with the umbrella. Celeste's voice echoed up the stairs. I froze. I was trapped in the study, holding the file that proved they were hunting me, and the hunters had just come home. I snapped the folder shut, but in my haste I knocked a heavy crystal paperweight off the desk. It hit the floor with a sound that shattered the silence like a gunshot. Who is up there? Celeste's voice was sharp, immediate. I killed the flashlight. Footsteps started pounding up the stairs. I crouched behind the heavy velvet drapes of the study window. My breath held so tight in my chest I thought my lungs might burst. The flashlight was off, shoved deep into the pocket of my maternity dress in my hand. I gripped the red folder titled Claiborne. Verification as if it were a shield. The footsteps I had heard earlier had stopped just outside the door, but the conversation had moved inside. I risked a glance at the papers in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. What I saw made the bile rise in my throat. It was not just a background check. It was a surveillance log that predated our relationship. There were photos of me buying coffee at a Boder 3 months before Grant and I had supposedly met by accident at the Ritz-Carlton. There were financial breakdowns of my meager bank accounts, labeled low-risk and asset void. There was a diagram, a literal map connecting me to Grant with a timeline marked in quarters. My wedding date was not marked with a heart. It was marked with the words acquisition phase complete. They had not just found me. They had selected me. I was the perfect candidate, a woman with the right manners, but no apparent power, no fortune, and seemingly no family to ask questions. I was the placeholder wife they needed to look respectable while they maneuvered something darker in the background. Stop pacing, Sloane. You are ruining the carpet. Celeste's voice cut through the room. She was sitting at her desk, just 10 feet away from where I was hiding. I am not pacing. I am calculating. Sloane snapped back. The sweetness she displayed in front of Grant was gone, replaced by the sharp metallic edge of ambition. The merger with the Merit Trust cannot happen while she is still playing house upstairs. The board is getting nervous. They know Whitaker Dominion is bleeding cash. If we do not announce the alliance soon, the creditors are going to start seizing assets. We cannot announce an alliance while my son is still married to the incubator, Celeste replied calmly. The incubator. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stop a sob from escaping. That was all I was to her. A vessel. So speed it up. Sloane hissed. Kick her out. You said she signed the prenup. It is ironclad. The pregnancy complicates the optics. Celeste said, the sound of a pen tapping against the desk echoing in the silence. Judges tend to be sympathetic to weeping pregnant women. We need Cores. We need her to be the villain. That is why we are letting her stay for now. Let her get hysterical. Let her accuse you of affairs. The crazier she looks, the easier it will be to paint her as unstable when we file. And the baby, Sloane asked. I do not want her baggage running around my house. Once the child is born, we demand a DNA test, Celeste said. Her voice was so matter-of-fact, she could have been discussing the dinner menu, not because we doubt the paternity, but because it stalls the settlement. We drag it out in court. We bury her in legal fees she cannot afford. She will sign away custody just to make it stop. And then the remaining debt is restructured under your name, and Grant is free. The door opened again, the heavy tread of wingtips on the hardwood. Grant, I watched through the sliver of space between the curtains. My husband walked into the room. He looked tired, his tie loosened, a glass of scotch in his hand. He did not look like a villain. He looked like a man who had sold his soul and was now too exhausted to negotiate the buyback. Grant, darling, Sloane cubed, her voice instantly dropping into that sultry register she used on him. We were just discussing the transition. Grant slumped into the leather armchair. He did not look at Sloane. He looked at his mother. She asked me about the bracelet today, the one for Sheila, and Celeste asked. I lied. Grant said, taking a long swallow of his drink. I told her it was a client gift. She believed me, but she is scared. Mother, she knows something is wrong. It does not matter what she knows, Celeste said coldly. It matters what she can prove. Does she have access to the accounts? No. Grant said, I changed the passwords this morning. She is locked out. Good. Celeste stood up. Remember, Grant, this is not cruelty. This is survival. The Whittaker name does not survive bankruptcy. Sloane is bringing the capital we need to save your legacy. Esther was a lovely interlude, but she is not a partner. She is a liability. Grant closed his eyes for a second. I prayed he would defend me. I prayed he would stand up and say that I was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he had sworn to love. Just make it quick, Grant whispered. When the time comes, do not let her suffer more than necessary. It was not a defense. It was a mercy killing. That was the moment my heart finally hardened. The grief evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. They were not a family. They were a corporation, and I was a bad investment. They were writing off. They left the study 10 minutes later to dress for dinner. I waited until the footsteps faded before slipping out from behind the curtains. I did not run. I did not cry. I walked back to my room with the silence of a ghost. For the next 3 days, I played my part perfectly. I was the weeping hormonal wife. I stayed in bed. I apologized for my outbursts. I let Sloane make coffee in my kitchen without complaint. I let them think they had broken me. But under the covers, I was working. I needed legal counsel. I knew I could not use the family lawyer. I needed someone outside their sphere of influence. I used an old laptop I had kept from my college days, one I had never connected to the house Wi-Fi, tethering it to a prepaid phone I had bought with cash from the grocery money. I found a lawyer in DOHC, a shark known for tearing apart prenuptial agreements. I drafted a careful email outlining the situation, the assets I suspected they were hiding, and the conversation I had overheard. I hit send and waited for a lifeline. The next morning I checked my inbox. Undeliverable. Mailbox error 505. I frowned and tried again. Same error. I tried to log into my bank account to check my balance. Access denied. I tried to log into the cloud storage where I kept my personal photos. Password incorrect. I sat back, a chill running down my spine. It was not a glitch. It was a firewall. They were monitoring the outgoing traffic. They had put a digital cage around the house. I realized then that I was not just being gaslighted. I was being quarantined. They were cutting off my escape routes one by one. If I tried to fight them now without hard evidence, without money, without a voice, they would destroy me. They would tell the world I was a paranoid, unstable woman who hallucinated conspiracies, and with their PR machine, the world would believe them. I needed hard copies. Digital files could be deleted, emails could be blocked, but they could not delete a physical drive. I knew where Grant kept the backups for the Whittaker Dominion accounts. He was careless with physical security because he was so arrogant about his digital ones. He kept a backup drive in the safe in the study, but he often left the master key in his desk drawer, a habit from college he had never broken. I waited until Tuesday afternoon. Celeste was at her garden club. Grant was at the office. Sloane was allegedly at a spar, though I suspected she was actually meeting with the board. The house was quiet. I crept into the study. My hands were steady this time. I found the key under the false bottom of the pen holder. I opened the safe. There it was, the silver USB drive. The lifeboat, Grant called it. It contained the ledgers, the real ledgers, the ones that would show the debt, the embezzlement disguised as charity, and the proposed transfer of assets to Sloane's shell company. I inserted the drive into Grant's desktop computer. I did not need to crack the password to copy the files. I just needed to mirror the drive. I plugged in my own USB, a cheap plastic thing I had bought at the pharmacy, and started the transfer, copying 20%. I stared at the progress bar, willing it to move faster. 40%. I heard a car door slam outside, my heart hammered against my ribs. It was too early. They were not supposed to be back for another 2 hours. 60%. I heard the front door open, the click of heels on the marble foyer. Celeste, she must have forgotten something. 80%. Esther. Her voice floated up the stairs, sweet and poisonous. Are you home, dear? I did not answer. I stared at the screen. 95%. Come on, come on. Transfer complete. I yanked my USB drive out of the port and shoved it into the waistband of my maternity leggings. I pulled the master drive out and threw it back into the safe, locking the door and tossing the key back into the drawer. Just as the doorknob to the study turned, I spun around, leaning against the desk, trying to look casual. Celeste stood in the doorway. She was still wearing her coat. She did not look like a woman who had forgotten her gloves. She looked like a warden doing the cell check. Her eyes darted to the computer screen, which was now dark, and then to my face. She saw the flush on my cheeks. She saw the way my hand hovered protectively over my side. She stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. The click of the latch sounded incredibly loud. You look flushed, Esther, she said, walking slowly toward me. And what were you doing in Grant's office? You know he hates it when the staff disturbs his papers. I was looking for a stamp. I've lied. My voice was steady, but my pulse was roaring in my ears. I wanted to mail a letter to my mother. Celeste stopped 2 feet away from me. She smelled of expensive roses and rot. Her gaze dropped to my waist, right where the hard plastic of the USB drive pressed against my skin. A letter, she repeated, her lips curling into a smile that did not reach her eyes. She held out her hand, palm up, expectant, demanding. Show me the letter, Esther. I left it in my room. I stammered, backing away until my hips hit the edge of the desk. Celeste took another step forward, invading my personal space. Her eyes were cold, dead things. She knew somehow. She knew. I do not think there is a letter, she said softly, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a scream. I think you are stealing from us. I think you are trying to take things that do not belong to you. She reached out, her hand moving toward my pocket. You have something in there, she said. Concealing family property is a crime. You know. Give it to me. I have nothing, I said, bracing myself. Oh, Esther, she sighed, shaking her head. You really are a terrible liar. You dear, where are you going to run? She lunged. I did not even have time to catch my breath after Celeste's hand brushed my pocket. She did not find the drive. I had stepped back just in time, but the intent in her eyes shifted from suspicion to immediate execution. She did not need proof of theft to destroy me. She just needed me gone before I could find proof of their fraud. Maria Celeste's voice boomed through the hallway, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Bring the suitcases, the gray ones, and bring the heavy-duty trash bags. I stood frozen near the study door as Maria, our housekeeper, who had once made me ginger tea for my morning sickness, appeared with her head bowed. She would not look at me. She skewered past, her loyalty clearly purchased by the paycheck signed by the Whittaker estate. "You have 1 hour," Celeste said, checking her diamond wristwatch. "Actually, make it 30 minutes. I want the air in this house purified before dinner." "You cannot do this," I said, my hand instinctively going to my belly. "I am 7 months pregnant. It is 40 outside. I have rights of residency. You have what we give you," Celeste hissed, stepping around me as if I were a stain on the carpet. "And right now we are giving you the exit." I ran. I did not run to my room to pack. I ran downstairs to find the one person who I foolishly thought might still possess a spine. I found Grant in the living room. The afternoon light was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was standing by the window, holding up a series of paint swatches against the wall. Sloane was next to him, a glass of Chardonnay in one hand, pointing at a shade of pale blue. "I think the morning mist is better for the nursery," Sloane was saying. "It is more modern. The yellow Esther picked is so dated." They were redecorating. I was still living in the house. My toothbrush was still in the bathroom. My clothes were still in the closet, and they were already painting over my existence. "Grant," I gasped, clutching the door frame for support. He turned slowly. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw shame. But then he looked at Sloane, and the shame was replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. "Mother says it is time." Grant said he sounded bored. He sounded like he was firing an underperforming intern. "Grant, she is throwing me out," I pleaded, walking toward him. "I am your wife. This is our child. You cannot just let her toss me onto the street like garbage." Sloane took a sip of her wine, watching me with amusement. "Oh, sweetie, do not be dramatic. It is bad for the blood pressure." "Grant, look at me." I screamed, the desperation finally tearing through my composure. "We made vows. You promised to protect me." Grant finally met my eyes. He set the paint swatches down on the side table with deliberate care. He walked over to me, stopping just outside of arm's reach. "We are not in the same world, Esther," he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of anger, which made it infinitely worse. "I tried to bring you up to mine, but you just do not fit. You never did. You are a liability to the family future." "A liability," I whispered. "I love you." "Love does not pay the creditors," he said simply. Then he turned his back to me. "Maria, make sure you pack her coats. I do not want the neighbors saying we were cruel." The next 20 minutes were a blur of violence disguised as cleaning. I watched Maria sweep my clothes from the hangers into the suitcase. My toiletries were dumped into a plastic bag. The photo of my mother I kept on the nightstand was tossed and face down. It was not packing. It was an eviction of the soul. When I was heralded to the front door, the suitcase was heavy, dragging behind me like a dead weight. Maria did not offer to carry it. She opened the front door and Celeste was already there, standing on the porch like a captain on the bridge of a ship. She signaled to Maria, who gave the suitcase a shove. It tumbled down the limestone steps, the plastic wheels clattering loudly, finally landing on the pavement with a thud that sounded like a bone breaking. I stumbled after it, gripping the railing, trying to keep my balance as the baby kicked violently against my ribs. "Get out." Celeste's voice rang out, projected perfectly for the audience she knew was there. I looked up. The cul-de-sac was alive. It was late afternoon, the time when Briar Ridge woke up from its midday slumber. Mrs. Marshall was across the street, holding the hose, but watering the driveway, her eyes fixed on us. 2 joggers had stopped, and right near the hedge, the Petersons' teenage son was holding his phone up, the red light of a live stream blinking steadily. "Smile, Esther," Celeste sneered, leaning over the banister. "You are finally famous." "Please," I whispered, my pride crumbling under the weight of the spectacle. "Everyone is watching." "Let them watch," Celeste shouted, spreading her arms wide. "Let them see what happens to grifters. This woman," she pointed a manicured finger at me, "thought she could trap my son. She thought a pregnancy would secure a payout." The accusation hung in the air. "Toxic and heavy," the neighbors murmured. I saw heads shaking. They believed her. Of course they believed her. She was Celeste Whittaker, the matriarch of Briar Ridge. I was just the girl with no background who had married above her station. I reached for the handle of my suitcase, my face burning with a heat that felt like a physical burn. I felt naked, exposed, stripped of every layer of dignity I had tried to build over the last 3 years. Then the front door opened again. Sloane stepped out. She wrapped her arm around Grant's waist, leaning her head on his shoulder. She looked at the camera phone across the street, then at me, and offered a sad, pitying smile. "We just want you to get help, Esther," Sloane said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We tried everything, but for the safety of the family, you have to go." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was the concerned new partner. I was the unstable ex. I felt the world tilt. Black spots danced at the edge of my vision. The stress, the fear, the physical exertion. It was too much. I swayed, my knees buckling. "Easy now." A rough hand grabbed my elbow, steadying me. I looked up to see Mr. Graham Dorsey. He had crossed the invisible line between the lawns. He was holding a bottle of water in his old smartphone. "Drink," he commanded softly, uncapping the bottle and pressing it into my shaking hand. "They are filming," I choked out, tears finally spilling over. "Let them film," Mr. Graham muttered, his eyes dark with anger as he looked up at the porch. "It will make excellent evidence later." "Make the call, child. You know who to call." I took the phone. My fingers were numb. I dialed the number that had been burned into my memory since childhood, the number of the emergency line my brothers maintained for catastrophic failures. It rang once. "Skeek," Mason's voice answered. I looked at Celeste. She was beaming. She looked like a queen who had just ordered an execution and found it entertaining. I looked at Grant, who was studying his shoes. I looked at Sloane, who was pining for the live stream. "They threw me out," I said into the phone. My voice was broken. "Or they put me on the street." "Mason, everyone is watching." "Location," Mason asked. His tone did not change, but I heard the background noise on his end stop instantly. "The cur. Briar Ridge. Please stay standing." Mason said, "We are turning the corner." I lowered the phone. I took a deep breath, trying to fill my lungs, trying to stand as tall as a woman carrying a child in the weight of the world could stand. Celeste saw me hang up. She laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Who is it?" "Dear," she called out, playing to the crowd. "The shutter. Or did you call a taxi you cannot afford? Do not worry. I will give the driver a $10 bill when he arrives. Consider it severance." She turned to Sloane and Grant, likely to make a joke about my poverty, but the joke never landed. It started as a vibration in the asphalt under my feet, a low, menacing rumble that grew louder with every second. It was the sound of raw horsepower, the sound of engines that cost more than the house behind me. The teenager with the phone turned his camera away from me and toward the entrance of the street. "Mrs. Marshall dropped her hose. Two black SUVs, sleek and armored, tore around the corner of the cul-de-sac. They were moving fast, too fast for a residential zone, moving with the aggressive precision of a motorcade. They did not slow down until the last possible second, the tires screeching slightly as they drifted into a halt directly in front of the Whittaker driveway, blocking the view of the neighbors, blocking the exit, blocking everything. The engines cut. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. The doors of the lead car opened in unison. Celeste's smile faltered. She took a half step back, her hand going to her throat. She looked at the cars, then at me, and for the first time in 3 years I saw the dawn of true fear in her eyes. She realized, too late, that the predator was not the one on the porch. The predators had just arrived. The silence that followed the arrival of the convoy was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for natural disasters or the arrival of heads of state. The lead SUV's door opened with a solid, heavy thud, and a man stepped out. Mason Claiborne. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him with the kind of architectural precision that screams Savile Row. He did not look like he belonged in a Virginia suburb. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom in Manhattan where nations were bought and sold. He adjusted his cufflinks platinum, catching the dying sun, and scanned the scene with eyes that were terrifyingly calm. Behind him from the second vehicle, Reed stepped out. If Mason was the shield, Reed was the sword. He was dressed in navy, his tie loosened just slightly, holding a tablet in one hand and a phone in the other. He looked at the Whittaker house, not as a home, but as a depreciating asset he was about to liquidate. I stood frozen by my suitcase, my breath catching in my throat. I had not seen them in 4 years. I had run away from their world, from the suffocating pressure of the Claiborne legacy, desperate to prove that I was just Esther, not the Aries. I had wanted to build something of my own. And now here I was standing in the ruins of my independence, waiting for them to pick up the pieces. Mason walked straight toward me. He did not run. He moved with a fluidity that commanded the space. He ignored Celeste. He ignored Grant. He ignored the teenager filming on the lawn. He walked right up to the curb, stopped in front of me, and looked at my face, then down at my swollen stomach. The neighbor's live stream must have been catching every second of this. Mason slowly went down on one knee right there on the dirty pavement. He didn't care about his suitcase. He reached out and placed a large warm hand gently on my shoulder. "Esther," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated through my chest. It wasn't angry. It was heartbreakingly gentle. "You are shaking." I tried. I whispered, the shame burning hot in my throat. I tried to do it on my own. "Mason, I didn't want you to think I was weak." "Look at me," Mason commanded softly. I met his eyes. They were the same shade of steel gray as mine. "You carried a child alone in a house full of wolves. You are the strongest person in this zip code, but you are done fighting alone." He stood up, his hand moving from my shoulder to the small of my back, creating a barrier between me and the world. "From now on, you do not explain yourself to anyone. Not to them, not to us, not to the world." Then the atmosphere shifted. The tenderness evaporated the moment Reed walked up to join us. Reed did not look at me. He was looking past me, staring directly up at the porch where Celeste, Grant, and Sloan were huddled. They looked like statues that had suddenly realized they were made of cheap plaster. "Who threw the bags?" Reed asked. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice carried across the lawn with the clarity of a judge reading the death sentence. Celeste blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at the cars, the blackout windows, the government-grade tires, and then at the two men standing like sentinels at the bottom of her driveway. She looked at the security detail that had quietly fanned out around the perimeter, men with earpieces who stood with their hands clasped in front of them, blocking the view of the neighbors. The neighbors were whispering now. I could hear the buzz. "Is that a Maybach? Look at the security. Is she royalty? That watch on the tall one, that is a Patek. I saw it in a magazine. It costs $250,000. The narrative was flipping in real time. I wasn't the poor girl anymore. I was something much more confusing and therefore much more dangerous. I asked a question, Reed said, taking a step forward. He stepped onto the bottom step of the Whittaker walkway. Technically, he was trespassing. Practically, he owned the ground he stood on. Who gave the order to throw my sister's belongings onto the street like refuge? Celeste finally found her voice, though it was an octave higher than usual. "Now, see here, this is private property. We have conducted a thorough investigation into Esther's background. We know she has no family of consequence. If you are hired actors, I suggest you leave before I call the police." Mason laughed. It was a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. He turned his head slowly to look at Celeste. "An investigation," Mason repeated. "You spent $3,000 on a private investigator who ran a standard database search. If you had spent $10,000, you might have found the sealed trusts. If you had spent $50,000, you would have found the connection to Claiborne Industries, but you were cheap. Celeste, you have always been cheap. That is why your company is currently drowning, isn't it?" The color drained from Celeste's face so fast she looked like a corpse. "How do you know about the company?" "We know about the liquidity crisis," Reed said, tapping his tablet screen with a bored expression. "We know about the 3 bridge loans you took out last month to cover payroll. We know that Whittaker Dominion is technically insolvent as of 9/00 this morning." Grant stepped forward, trying to muster some of the arrogance he usually wore so well. "Who are you people? You cannot just come here and grant. Be quiet, Sloane hissed, grabbing his arm. Her eyes were darting between Mason and Reed with the panic of a rat that smells smoke. She knew. She recognized the cut of the suits, the specific breed of power radiating off them. Grant, get inside now. Sloane tried to pull him back toward the front door. Grant, looking confused and terrified, turned to follow her. Reed just raised two fingers in the air. Two of the security guards moved. They didn't run. They just stepped onto the porch, blocking the front door with their bodies. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a wall of black Kevlar and muscle. I didn't say you could leave, Reed said calmly. We are having a family meeting. Since you were so eager to involve the neighborhood, I think we should finish it out here. This is kidnapping, Celeste shrieked, clutching the porch railing. No, this is a hostile takeover, Mason corrected. He turned to me, his face softening again. Esther, get in the car. The second one. It has heated seats and tinted glass. You do not need to stand for this part. Mason, I grabbed his sleeve. What are you going to do? We are going to teach them a lesson in economics, Mason said. Go sit down. Breathe. A bodyguard opened the rear door of the second SUV. I allowed myself to be led away. I sank into the leather seat, the smell of new car and safety enveloping me. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing out the noise, sealing out the cold. Through the tinted glass, I watched the scene unfold like a silent movie. I saw Mason unbutton his jacket and stand at the base of the stairs, looking up at the people who had tormented me for 3 years. I saw Grant trembling. I saw Sloane trying to make a call on her cell phone, her fingers tapping frantically, but it was Reed who held my attention. He was checking his watch. He stood perfectly still, staring at the gate of the Briar Ridge community as if waiting for an invisible signal. Then his phone buzzed. He lifted it to his ear. He listened for exactly 5 seconds. He did not say hello. He did not say goodbye. He just said 3 words. It is done. He lowered the phone and looked up at Celeste. He pointed a finger directly at her handbag inside the car. I couldn't hear the ringtone, but I saw the reaction. Celeste jumped as her phone began to vibrate. She pulled it out of her bag. Looking at the screen, she frowned. She declined the call. It rang again immediately. She declined it again. It rang a 3rd time. Then Grant's phone started lighting up. Then Sloane's. I watched Celeste answer the phone, annoyance written all over her face. I saw her mouth the word "what?" And then I watched her face collapse. It wasn't just fear. It was the look of someone watching the ground open up beneath their feet. She dropped the phone. It clattered onto the porch, bouncing once before sliding to a stop near Grant's feet. Reed smiled. It was the coldest thing I had ever seen. The phone Celeste had dropped lay on the porch mat, the screen still glowing, a silent testament to the disaster that had just unfolded. I lowered the window of the SUV completely. The heated air of the car mixed with the chilly afternoon breeze, but the real drop in temperature was coming from the porch. I do not understand, Celeste stammered, her hands trembling as she gripped the railing. She looked at Reed, then down at her phone, then back at Reed. The bank assured us we had until the end of the month. We are in the middle of a restructuring deal. Reed stepped forward. He held his tablet like a weapon. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice was the dry, terrifying sound of mathematics. You were in the middle of a restructuring deal, Reed corrected. Whittaker Dominion has been floating on 3 separate bridge loans since February. High-interest short-term debt secured against your primary assets. This house, the downtown office, and the factory in Norfolk. We are refinancing, Grant yelled, stepping in front of his mother. He looked pale, sweat beating on his forehead despite the cold. Sloane secured the capital. We are signing the papers tomorrow. That is the problem with distressed debt, Grant, Mason said, walking up to stand beside his brother. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking at the house with the critical eye of a demolition expert. It is a commodity. It can be bought and sold. And this morning at 9:15, the bank decided they would rather have 70 cents on the dollar in cash from us than wait for you to default. We bought the paper, Reed said simply. All of it. $140 million of toxic debt. Claiborne Holdings is now your primary creditor, and according to the covenants of the loan. A change in ownership allows the creditor to call in the full amount immediately if the debtor's solvent is in question. Celeste let out a strangled noise. You cannot do that. It is illegal. It is predatory. It is the market, Reed replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. You love the market, Celeste. You spent your whole life telling Esther she did not understand how the real world works. Well, this is the real world. You missed a payment notification 3 days ago. That was a technical default. I am exercising my right to foreclose. Foreclose, Celeste whispered. She looked around at the house, at the columns, at the manicured lawn, on the company, on everything. Reed said, the company, the factory, and the house. As of 60 minutes ago, you are trespassing on property owned by a subsidiary of Claiborne Holdings. Grant spun around to look at Sloan. Tell them, Sloan, tell them about the merit injection. We have the money coming. Sloan took a step back. The smug confidence she had worn 10 minutes ago was cracking, revealing the panic beneath. She looked at Reed, and I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She realized she had been outplayed. I can make a call to the board, Sloan stammered. We can expedite the transfer, Reed laughed. It was a dark, mirthless sound. You really do not get it, do you? Sloan, you were not the savior. You were the bait. Sloan froze. Excuse me. We knew the Whiters were desperate, Reed explained, swiping a finger across his tablet. We knew they would only sign the new collateral agreements if they thought they were getting a lifeline from a friendly face. You pushed them to leverage the house to secure the merit deal, didn't you? You told them it was just a formality. Sloan went pale. We bought the Merit Trust's position in this deal 2 days ago. Mason added smoothly. You have been negotiating a deal with us the entire time. You just did not know it because we used a shell company. You led them right into the slaughterhouse. Sloan, you got them to sign over the deed to the house as collateral for a loan that we now own. The silence that fell over the porch was heavy enough to crush bones. Celeste looked at Sloan with pure horror. The woman she had welcomed as a daughter, the woman she had chosen over me, had unknowingly handed the keys of the kingdom to the executioners. You idiot! Celeste screamed, shoving Sloan. You said it was safe. You said you had control. I did, Sloan shrieked back, losing her composure entirely. I did not know they were behind the Shell Corporation. Nobody knew. Grant looked at the chaos erupting on his porch, his mother screaming, his mistress panicking, his inheritance evaporating into thin air. Then he looked at the car. He saw me. He ran down the steps. The security guards moved to intercept him, but Grant stopped 10 st away. He fell to his knees on the asphalt. It was pathetic. It was a man who had never had to fight for anything, suddenly realizing he had nothing left to fight with. Esther's, he shouted, tears streaming down his face. Esther, please tell them to stop. This is my family's home. My grandfather built this house. I looked at him through the open window. I waited for the pang of love, the ache of nostalgia. I waited to feel sorry for the man I had married, but I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger who had watched his mother throw my suitcase down those same stairs less than an hour ago. Esther, baby, I am sorry. Grant sobbed. I was confused. They pressured me. I love you. I only did it because I thought it was the only way to save us. Please call off your brothers. Mason stepped between Grant and the car door. He did not touch Grant. He just stood there, a wall of gray wool and indifference. She is not listening, Grant, Mason said. And frankly, the house is the least of your problems. Reed walked back to the SUV and pulled a file from the front seat. He walked up to the porch and tossed it at Celeste's feet. Papers spilled out, spreadsheets, bank transfers, emails. What is this? Celeste whispered, staring at the scattered documents. That, Reed said, pointing to a highlighted column, is the ledger for the Whittaker Foundation, the charity you use to gain social capital. We do excellent work, Celeste sniffed, trying to regain a shred of dignity. You move money. Red corrected. $3 million in consulting fees paid to a firm in the Caymans that does not exist. Another $2 million moved through the Garler budget into personal accounts held by Grant. That is not charity, Celeste. That is embezzlement and tax fraud. And since the foundation is technically a shareholder in the company we just acquired, we have a fiduciary duty to report irregularities. You are lying. Sloane stepped forward, her face twisted in a snarl. This is slander. I will sue you. I will sue you for everything you have. My family has lawyers who will bury you. Mason turned his attention to Sloane. He looked at her with an expression of mild curiosity, as if she were a bug he was about to step on. You want to talk about the law, Sloane? Mason asked. Let's talk about the law, specifically family law. I have nothing to hide, Sloane spat. Really? Mason reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. Because my team did a little digging into your background, too, since you were so eager to become the next Mrs. Whittaker. He held the paper up. It was a copy of a marriage license. Who is Travis Miller? Mason asked. Sloane stopped breathing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Travis Miller, Mason continued, reading from the paper. A bartender in Reno, Nevada. You married him 4 years ago after a very long weekend. And according to the records in Clark County, you never filed for divorce. You just left. Grant looked up from the ground, his eyes wide. She is still married, Grant, Mason said, dropping the paper so it fluttered down next to Celeste's feet. She could not have married you. The whole plan, the wedding, the merger of the families, the new dynasty, it was all legally impossible. She is a bigamist. I forgot, Sloane whispered. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. You forgot you had a husband. Celeste screeched. You fraud. You come into my house. You seduce my son. And you are married to a bartender. It was a mistake, Sloane yelled, backing away as Celeste advanced on her. It does not count. It counts in court, Reed said calmly. And it definitely counts for the fraud investigation. You signed legal documents for the Whittaker merger claiming to be single and eligible for asset combination, that is perjury and securities fraud. Grant was still on his knees, looking between his mother and Sloane. The two women who had controlled his life were now tearing each other apart. The perfect facade of Briar Ridge was dissolving into a circus of screaming and recriminations. Esther, Grant whimpered again, looking at me. Please, I did not know. I leaned forward slightly. You did not know because you did not care to look, Grant. Just like you never looked at me. You just saw what you wanted to see. Grant slumped, defeated. Then we heard it. It started as a wail in the distance, rising and falling, cutting through the crisp evening air. Sirens, but not the single siren of a patrol car, coming to tell the neighbors to keep it down. This was a chorus. Blue and red lights began to flash against the trees at the end of the street. Is that the police? Celeste asked, her voice trembling. Did you call the police on us for shouting? We did not call the police, Reed said, checking his watch again. We submitted a dossier to the State Financial Crimes Division and the IRS regarding the foundation's irregularities about 48 hours ago. They moved surprisingly fast when 2 billionaires flagged a high-priority risk of flight. The convoy of police vehicles turned the corner, but they were not alone. Behind the marked cars were 2 dark sedans with federal plates. Reed looked at the lead car as it screeched to a halt behind our SUVs. A woman in a windbreaker marked FBI. Financial Crimes stepped out. She was holding a folded document in her hand. That, Reed said, nodding at the woman, is not a noise complaint. Celeste, that is a search warrant. The suite had sent. Jude's private hospital did not smell like a hospital. It smelled like lemon verbena and old money. My brother Mason had rented out the entire east wing of the maternity ward, turning it into a fortress of solitude. Your blood pressure is still too high, Mrs. Whittaker. Doctor, Evans said, adjusting the monitor. He paused, correcting himself. MS. Claiborne, you need absolute quiet. No screens, no news. Stress at this stage could induce early labor. Doctor, with all due respect, I said, sitting up against the mountain of hypoallergenic pillows, my life is currently the headline on every news ticker in America. Stress is not a variable. It is the environment. Mason, sitting in the corner armchair with his laptop, looked up. She is right, Doctor. We cannot shield her from the war. We can only make sure she wins it. The doctor sighed and left as soon as the door clicked shut. Reed walked in. He looked energized, the way a shark looks when there is blood in the water. "The hearing is set for tomorrow morning," Reed said, dropping a thick binder onto the bedside table. "Emergency motion for protection and asset freezing. But before we get to the judge, we have already won the jury of public opinion." He turned the television on. I saw myself. It was the footage from the teenager's phone across the street. But on the large screen, it looked even more brutal. A pregnant woman stumbling downstairs. A suitcase thrown like garbage. Celeste shouting about trash. The internet had done what the internet does best. It had weaponized empathy. The hashtag Justice Forrester was trending #1 globally. Celeste hired a crisis management firm out of New York this morning, Reed explained, pointing at the ticker. They are trying to spin it. They are releasing statements claiming the video was staged, that you are a mentally unstable actress hired by corporate rivals to sabotage the merger. They are calling it performance-art blackmail. People believe that I asked, horrified. "No," Mason said, his voice grim, "because 10 minutes ago, we leaked the internal emails regarding the eviction timeline." Reed tapped his tablet. "They are claiming they evicted you for safety, but we have a time-stamped email from Grant to Celeste dated 3 days ago. Subject line removal protocol content. Make sure she is gone before the Garler photos. I do not want her belly ruining the aesthetic of the rebranding." I closed my eyes. Hearing it read aloud hurt more than a fall on the pavement, ruining the aesthetic. That was all my child was to him, a visual defect. "We are not just suing for divorce," Mason said gently. "We are suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, financial abuse, and defamation. We are going to bleed them dry, Esther." The next morning, the courthouse looked like a red carpet event gone wrong. Reporters swarmed the steps. When the SUVs pulled up, Mason and Reed flanked me like a human shield. I wore a simple white dress, not to look innocent, but because it was the only thing that fit. Inside, the air was frigid. Celeste sat on the left looking haggarded. Her pearls were gone, replaced by a modest scarf. A calculated costume changed to look like a sympathetic grandmother. Grant sat next to her, staring at the table. Sloan was there, too, looking twitchy and over-caffeinated. The hearing was technically about the emergency restraining order and temporary support, but it turned into an autopsy of a marriage. Grant's lawyer, a slick man with a terrifyingly white smile, stood up first. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with faux sincerity, "Mr. Whittaker is a victim here. He is a man torn between a mother he respects and a wife who has refused to seek treatment for her paranoia. The eviction, while regrettable in its optics, was an intervention. Mr. Whittaker was manipulated by his mother, yes, but he had no malicious intent toward his wife. It was a smart play. Throw Celeste under the bus to save the son." Grant was nodding along, playing the confused boy. Then Reed's lead counsel, a woman named MS. Sterling, who had a reputation for eating CEOs for breakfast, stood up. "We would like to call a surprise witness to the stand." MS. Sterling said, "Mr. Arthur Higgins." Celeste's head snapped up. Arthur was the head butler at the Whittaker estate. He had worked there for 30 years. He was the man who polished the silver and kept the secrets. Arthur walked to the stand. He looked tired. He refused to look at Celeste. "Mr. Higgins, MS." Sterling asked, "Did you witness the events of Tuesday afternoon?" "I did," Arthur said. His voice was steady. "And did you witness the events leading up to it?" "Yes," the defense claims Mr. Whittaker was a passive observer, coerced by his mother. "Is that accurate?" Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "Mr. Whittaker installed a new security system inside the house 6 months ago. He told the staff it overwrote footage every 24 hours. It does not. It keeps a 30-day archive. I made a copy before the police arrived because I have a daughter and I could not watch what they were doing to Mrs. Whittaker." The courtroom went silent. MS. Sterling plugged the drive in. The screens on the wall flickered to life. It was footage from the kitchen dated 2 weeks ago. Grant and Sloan were standing by the island. "We have to time it right." Grant's voice on the recording was clear. "If we kick her out too early, She might lawyer up before the merger. If we do it too late, the baby is born and custody gets messy. We need to provoke a fight. Make her leave. Make it look like she abandoned the home. You're sure you can do it? Sloan asked in the video, tracing a finger down his tie. Watch me. Grant replied. I never wanted the baggage, Sloan. I just wanted the heir, but now even that is too expensive. In the courtroom, Grant put his head in his hands. The confused boy defense had just been incinerated. He wasn't a victim. He was the architect. I looked at him, and for the first time, the fear left me. I was not the one on trial here. Mrs. Whittaker, please take the stand, the judge ordered. I walked up. My hands rested on my stomach. I looked out at the sea of faces, the reporters sketching furiously, my brothers watching with intense focus, and the family that had tried to erase me. Esther, Ms. Sterling asked softly, why didn't you leave sooner? Because I thought I was the one who was wrong. I said into the microphone. My voice did not shake. They told me I was crazy. They told me I was hormonal. They told me I was lucky to be allowed in their house. When you are told you are worthless every day for 3 years by the people who are supposed to love you, you start to believe it. I stayed because I wanted my child to have a father. I did not realize I was living with a monster. Grant flinched as if I had slapped him. Then it was Sloane's turn. She walked to the stand with her chin high, but her hands were trembling. MS. Merit, MS. Sterling began, looking at a document in her hand. You claimed in your affidavit that you were merely a business consultant and that your relationship with Mr. Whittaker was professional until after the separation. That is correct, Sloane said tightly. Then can you explain, MS? Sterling projected an image on the screen. This invoice from a fertility clinic in Switzerland dated 4 months ago. It is billed to a joint account held by you and Mr. Whittaker. The service listed is genetic counseling for future family planning. Sloane turned red. That was for a theoretical scenario. Theoretical, Ms. Sterling raised an eyebrow. You were planning a family with a married man while his wife was 5 months pregnant with his child. And you did this while you were legally married to a Mr. Travis Miller in Nevada. I told you that marriage was a mistake. Sloane snapped, slamming her hand on the railing. It was a drunken weekend. It means nothing. It means you committed perjury on your affidavit today, MS. Sterling said coldly, and it means your character is highly relevant to the credibility of your testimony. Sloane looked at the judge, panic rising in her chest. They are twisting everything. She is the liar. Look at her. She played the poor orphan girl for years. You may step down, the judge said, looking at Sloane with undisguised distaste. We were winning. I could feel the momentum shifting. The judge was scribbling notes furiously. The restraining order was all but guaranteed. Then the Whittaker's lead counsel stood up. He looked desperate. He looked like a man who had been told to throw a grenade into a crowded room because he had no other ammunition left. Your Honor, the lawyer said, his voice booming. We have one final motion before you rule on the temporary support. Make it quick, the judge said. We are filing a motion for an immediate court-ordered prenatal paternity test. The room murmured. On what grounds? The judge asked, annoyed. Presumption of paternity applies to the husband. On the grounds of fraud, the lawyer said, pointing a finger at me. We have reason to believe that Esther Claiborne is not who she says she is. We believe she entered into this marriage under false pretenses to entrap the Whittaker fortune. If she lied about her family, about her billions, about her brothers, what else did she lie about? We believe the child is not a Whittaker. We believe this is a long con, and we demand DNA verification before a single cent of support is ordered. It was a dirty, vicious attack. They were implying I had slipped around. They were trying to question the legitimacy of the baby, to delay the payments, to humiliate me one last time in the public record. Mason stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His fists were clenched at his sides. I stood up too. I walked out of the witness box. I did not look at the judge. I walked past the defense table. I stopped right in front of Grant. He wouldn't look at me. I looked at the lawyer, then at Celeste, whose eyes were gleaming with a final desperate hope that this mud would stick. I turned to Mason and Reed, who were ready to tear the room apart. Let them do it. I said clearly. Mason froze. Esther's, no, it is invasive. It is insulting. I placed a hand on my belly and looked my brother in the eye. Let them run the test, I said, my voice ringing through the silent courtroom, because when the results come back positive, and they will, I want it on the official record that they denied their own blood for a tax break. I want that child to know exactly why we never looked back. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. Esther Reed called out. I stopped at the door and looked back at the stunned room. And while you were testing for DNA, I said to the Whittaker lawyer, you might want to check the paternity of the company's recent sudden injection of capital because I think you will find that belongs to me too. The boardroom in the hotel suite was filled with the hum of servers and the aggressive tapping of keyboards. My brothers had turned the living area into a command center. Mason was on the phone with a senator. Reed was tracking assets across 3 continents. They were in demolition mode. They wanted to scorch the earth where the Whittaker name stood. We can bankrupt the subsidiary by noon tomorrow, Reed said, not looking up from his screen. I can trigger a recall on the factory loans. It will put 300 people out of work, but it will crush Celeste's liquidity. No, I said. The room went silent. Mason lowered his phone. Reed stopped typing. They both looked at me. I was sitting on the sofa, a cup of herbal tea in my hand, staring at the copy of the prenuptial agreement that had been my cage for 3 years. Esther's, they tried to destroy you, Mason said, his voice tight with controlled rage. Collateral damage is acceptable. Not to me, I said, setting the tea down. I stood up. The dizziness was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. I do not want you to smash them because you are angry. I do not want a crater. I want a verdict. If we destroy the factory, we hurt innocent families. If we just bankrupt them, they play the victim. They will go on talk shows and cry about how the big bad Claiborne brothers bullied them. I walked over to the table and tapped the thick legal document. I want them to do it to themselves, I said, and I found the shovel. Reed frowned and walked over. The prenup, it is ironclad. Esther, we are fighting it. But read clause 14b. I interrupted. Subsection 3. Conduct detrimental to reputation and physical safety. It says that if either party engages in public behavior that brings irreparable shame to the family name or endangers the physical well-being of a resident, the asset protection clauses are voided. Read the text, his eyes widening, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. They wrote this to stop you from embarrassing them. Reed realized they were afraid you would get drunk at a garler or cause a scene. Exactly. I said, they wrote a clause to punish me for being low class, but they are the ones who threw a pregnant woman down the stairs on a live stream. They are the ones who screamed insults that 5 million people have now watched. They voided their own protection. Read the house, the investments, the shared accounts. They are all back on the table. We can file for a breach of contract, Mason said, nodding slowly. We can freeze everything. Not yet, I said. I looked at Reed. You said Celeste was moving money. She is panicking. Reed confirmed. She is trying to siphon funds from the foundation into a shell company in Delaware. We court the test transaction an hour ago. $10,000. She is testing the waters. Let her. I said, Esther. If she moves the capital after being served with a temporary freezing order, it is a felony. I said, it is not just a civil dispute anymore. It is prison time. We let her think she is clever. We let her move the money, and then we close the trap. My brothers looked at me for the first time. They did not see their little sister who needed saving. They saw a Claiborne. I need to see him, I said. One last time, Grant. Mason stepped forward, protective instinct flaring. Absolutely not. He is toxic. I need him on the record, I said. Arrange a mediation. Tell them we are open to a settlement. Tell them I'm emotional and want to make it go away. Celeste will jump at the chance to manipulate me one last time. The mediation took place 6 hours later in a neutral conference room downtown. The air was so tense, it felt solid. Celeste was there, flanked by 3 lawyers. Sloane was absent, likely hiding from her own legal disasters. And there was Grant. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was wearing a suit that looked like he had slept in it. When I walked in, flanked by a mess. Sterling, he flinched. We are here to discuss a quiet annulment. MS. Sterling announced, placing a recorder on the table. Everything said here is confidential for settlement purposes unless it pertains to the commission of a crime. Celeste's eyes narrowed. She looked at me, searching for weakness. She saw my hand resting on my belly and mistook it for fragility. Esther, darling, Celeste purred, leaning forward. I am glad you came to your senses. This whole circus is so unnecessary. If you just sign the papers, we can arrange a small stipend enough for you to get settled somewhere appropriate. I do not want your money, Celeste, I said softly. I turned my chair so I was facing Grant directly. He was staring at his hands. Grant, I said. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. I have one question, I said, and depending on how you answer it, I might sign your papers. Don't say anything, Grant, his lawyer warned. Let him speak. Celeste snapped. We need this signed. Grant, I continued, keeping my voice steady. Tuesday afternoon, when you stood in the living room and watched Maria pack my bags. When you told me we were not in the same world, I paused, letting the memories sit between us. Did you do it because you were afraid of your mother? Did she force you? Grant looked at Celeste. Then he looked at me. I saw the wheels turning in his head. He thought I was offering him a lifeline. He thought if he played the victim, I would forgive him. She puts a lot of pressure on me, Esther. Grant stammered. You know how she is. That is not what I asked, I said. I asked if you wanted me to go. Grant hesitated. Then, looking for the path of least resistance, he delivered the truth that would hang him. I just wanted it to be over, he said, his voice rising with a pathetic sort of frustration. I wanted my life back, Esther. It was too hard. The sneaking around with Sloane, the constant questions from Mother, the pressure of the debt. I just wanted to reset. I thought if you left I could breathe again. I just wanted peace. The room was silent. He hadn't been coerced. He hadn't been tricked. He had viewed his wife and unborn child as an inconvenience he wanted to delete so he could reset. Thank you, I said. That is all I needed. So, you will sign? Celeste asked eagerly, pushing the document across the table. I stood up. I didn't touch the paper. No, I said. I just needed to hear him admit that his comfort was worth more than our lives. MS. Sterling, my lawyer picked up the recorder. We are done here. We will see you in court tomorrow for the final hearing. You tricked us, Celeste shrieked, standing up. You said you wanted to settle. I lied. I said, walking to the door. I learned from the best. That night, back in the suite, I sat at the desk. The city lights of Morro Bay twinkled below, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the penthouses and courtrooms. I had a notepad in front of me. My brothers were asleep in the adjoining rooms. The security guard was posted outside the door. It was just me and the baby. I began to write my opening statement, not the one the lawyers drafted. My own. My name is Esther Claiborne. For 3 years. I apologized for existing. I apologized for not being rich enough, for not being pedigree enough, for not being Whittaker enough. Tomorrow I stopped apologizing. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote for every woman who had ever been told she was lucky to be chosen by a man who treated her like an accessory. I wrote for the child who was kicking against my ribs, who deserved a mother who was a fortress, not a doormat. A soft knock on the door broke my concentration. I looked at the clock. 2 in the morning. I walked to the door. Who is it? Room service. Ma'am, you requested hot water. I hadn't, but my throat was dry. I opened the door. A crack. A cart was there, but no waiter. Just a silver tray with a single plain white envelope resting on it. I frowned. I checked the hallway. Empty. The security guard was at the end of the corridor, his back turned, talking into his radio. Someone had slipped past him. I pulled the envelope inside and locked the door. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but the subject was unmistakable. It was a photo of me sitting on the park bench 2 days ago, rubbing my belly, but superimposed over it was a copy of my latest ultrasound, a medical record that should have been sealed in the hospital file. There was a note clipped to it. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. "If you walk into that courtroom tomorrow, you will lose everything. We will release the medical records. We will claim you are unfit. We will take the baby, go back to New York, or we destroy the child's future." It was the nuclear option. They were threatening to drag my unborn child into a custody hell that would last for years. They thought this would break me. They thought the fear of losing my baby would make me run. I looked at the ultrasound. I traced the curve of my baby's spine. Old Esther would have packed her bags. Old Esther would have called Mason and begged him to fly us away to a private island where they couldn't find us. But I wasn't old Esther. I felt a smile touch my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who realizes her enemies have just made a fatal tactical error. They were threatening a Claiborne with a legal battle. They were threatening a mother with a war she was already winning. "You really have no idea who you are dealing with," I whispered to the empty room. I took the note and the photo. I didn't tear them up. I placed them carefully into my evidence folder, right on top of my opening statement. They wanted a fight, fine. I would give them a slaughter. I walked into the courthouse at 8:45 in the morning. I did not wear sunglasses. I did not use the back entrance. I walked up the main granite steps with my head high, flanked by Mason and Reed. The reporters shouted my name, a chaotic chorus of questions, but I looked straight ahead. The envelope that had been slid under my door in the middle of the night, the one containing the stolen ultrasound and the threat to destroy my child's future, was burning a hole in my purse. But it was not a weight. It was ammunition. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick enough to choke on. Celeste sat at the defense table, looking surprisingly composed. She offered me a thin, tight smile when I entered, the kind of smile a shark gives before it drags you under. Brant looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Sloane was absent, but her lawyer was present, looking nervous. I sat down next to MS. Sterling. I reached into my bag, pulled out the white envelope, and slid it across the mahogany table to her. "They sent this at 2:00 in the morning," I whispered. "It is an attempt to intimidate a witness." MS. Sterling opened it, looked at the photo, and then looked at the opposing counsel. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "Excellent," she said softly. "They just handed us the nail for the coffin." The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, who was known for having zero patience for theatrics, called the session to order. "We are here to finalize the motion for the protective order and rule on the asset freeze." Justice said, Sterling, you may proceed." "Your Honor, MS." Sterling stood up. "Before we address the assets, we must address the safety of my client. The defense has argued that the eviction of a 7-month pregnant woman was a misunderstanding. We would like to submit Exhibit C." She played the clip, not the live stream from the neighbor, but the security footage from the mediation room. We had secretly recorded a recording that was admissible because the defense had waived confidentiality by threatening me with the ultrasound. Grant's voice filled the courtroom, clear and pathetic. "I just wanted it to be over. I wanted my life back. I thought if you left I could breathe again." Grant sank lower in his chair. He looked at Celeste, but she refused to make eye contact with him. "This is not a misunderstanding, Your Honor." MS. Sterling said, "This is a calculated disposal of a spouse. And if that is not enough, we have evidence that the defendant, Celeste Whittaker, is currently attempting to liquidate marital assets in violation of the temporary restraining order issued yesterday." Objection. Celeste's lawyer stood up. "That is speculation." "It is not speculation." Reed spoke up from the bench behind me. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "I have the transaction logs from the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. At 6 this morning, a transfer of $200,000 was attempted from the Whittaker Foundation to a shell company in Delaware listed under Celeste Whittaker's maiden name." Reed walked forward and handed a stack of papers to the bailiff. "The transfer was flagged and blocked," Reed continued, looking directly at Celeste, "because Claiborne Holdings owns the debt on the Foundation's primary account. You were trying to run with the money, Celeste, and you were leaving your son to hold the bag." Celeste went pale. Grant turned to look at his mother, his mouth hanging open. "Mother," Grant whispered, "you said That money was for the legal defense. It was, Celeste snapped, losing her composure. I was protecting us by moving it to an account only you control. Reed asked dryly. The judge slammed her gavel. Order MS. Whittaker. If I find you are moving assets, I will hold you in contempt faster than you can blink. The asset freeze is granted. Effective immediately, all accounts associated with the Whittaker name are locked. Celeste slumped back in her chair. That was it. Her power was her money, and Reed had just turned off the tap. But we weren't done. We have one final matter, Your Honor. MS. Sterling said, the matter of Ms. Sloane Merritt. Sloane's lawyer stood up. My client is not on trial here. Her credibility is MS. Sterling said, the defense's entire argument for the legitimacy of the separation rests on the idea that Grant, Whittaker, and Sloane Merritt are a legitimate couple. But we have a sworn affidavit here from a Mr. Travis Miller in Reno. MS. Sterling held up a document. MS. Merritt claimed her marriage to Mr. Miller was a forgotten mistake from 4 years ago. However, this affidavit includes a credit card receipt from a bed and breakfast in Lake Tahoe, dated 3 months ago. The reservation was under the names Mr. and Mrs. Miller. The courtroom gasped. She didn't forget she was married. Ms. Sterling said, turning to look at Grant. She was celebrating her anniversary with her husband while she was convincing you to evict your pregnant wife. She is not a partner, Mr. Whittaker. She is a con artist who found a bigger mark. Grant looked like he had been punched in the gut. The entire narrative, the love story, the business merger, the future, it was all a lie. He had destroyed his family for a woman who was playing him for a fool. Celeste stood up, shaking with rage. This is preposterous. My son is the victim here. He was manipulated by that woman. I have tried to protect him. I have tried to protect the family legacy. She pointed a trembling finger at me. And you are enjoying this. You want to ruin us because you are bitter. I stood up. I didn't ask for permission. I turned to face my mother-in-law. I am not bitter. Celeste, I said. My voice was calm, carrying to the back of the room without shouting. I am exhausted. You talk about legacy. You talk about protecting the family. But there is only one actual legacy in this room. I placed my hand on my stomach. This is your grandchild, I said. This is the future you claim to care about, but you threw him down the stairs. You tried to starve his mother out. You tried to sell his birthright to save a crumbling company. The room was so quiet. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. So tell me, I asked, looking her dead in the eye, do you want a grandchild or do you just want a social mask? Because you cannot have both. Celeste opened her mouth to speak, to launch another insult. But she stopped. She looked at the judge, at the reporters, at her ruined son. For the first time in her life, she had no line to deliver. She sat down, defeated. Justice Holloway adjusted her glasses. I have heard enough. The court grants the divorce on the grounds of cruelty and adultery. Full physical and legal custody of the unborn child is awarded to the mother, Esther Claiborne. A permanent restraining order is issued against Celeste Whittaker. And regarding the financial support, the judge looked at Grant. Mr. Whittaker, you will pay the maximum statutory amount, and frankly, you should consider yourself lucky. That is all the law requires. The gavel came down. Then it was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. As the court adjourned, chaos erupted, but it wasn't the chaos of the press. 2 men in dark suits walked through the swinging doors. They headed straight for the defense table. Celeste Whittaker, one of them said, flashing a badge. I am Agent Miller with the IRS. We have some questions regarding the Foundation's consulting fees. Celeste looked at the agent, then at Reed. Reed just checked his watch and nodded as if the train had arrived exactly on schedule. Celeste didn't scream this time. She just looked bold. I turned to leave. Mason and Reed were waiting for me, triumphant. Esther. I stopped. I knew that voice. I turned around. Grant had pushed past his lawyer. He was running toward me in the aisle. He looked frantic, broken, stripped of all the arrogance that had defined him. Tears were streaming down his face. Esther's, wait, he pleaded, reaching out, but stopping short of the invisible barrier Mason created just by shifting his stance. Please, I didn't know about Sloane. I didn't know about the money. I was lost. "Grant," I said, "we can fix this," he sobbed. "I will go to therapy. I will cut my mother off. I will do whatever you want. Just do not take my child away. Do not leave me with nothing." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had cooked dinner for, the man I had defended, the man I had loved, and I realized I felt absolutely nothing. No hate, no anger, just a profound hollow indifference. "I am not taking anything from you, Grant," I said softly. "You threw it away. Remember, you threw the suitcase. You made the choice. I can change." He cried. "It is too late." I said, "You chose your world. You chose your mother. You chose the lie because it was easier than the truth. You made your choice." I turned my back on him. "Now live with it." I walked out of the courtroom doors and into the blinding flash of the cameras. The air outside was cold, but it felt fresh. It felt clean. I walked down the steps, past the shouting reporters, past the questions. I saw the black SUV waiting at the curb. Mason held the door open for me. Before I got in, a process server handed me a clipboard. It was the final decree, ready for my signature. I took the pen. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling a strong, steady kick against my palm. My baby was ready, and so was I. I signed my name, not Esther Whittaker, Esther Claiborne. I handed the clipboard back and got into the car. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, shutting out the noise, shutting out the past. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back at the courthouse. I looked forward to the horizon where the rest of my life was waiting. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed watching the Whittakers get exactly what they deserved, please leave a comment down below and tell me where are you listening from today. I would love to hear your thoughts on Grant's Calmer. Don't forget to subscribe to Azad Revenge Stories. Like this video and hit that button so we can share this satisfaction with even more people. See you in the next story. Thanks to all.